We are employing old models, you said, from the 90s. I honestly believe, like the way we think about the sequential, I am going to sell and then you will take care of post sales and then you will call somebody, is done, is antiquated. We need to go back to first principles of what we are trying to do in this market and how we are serving and who we are serving, right? Think about the models that these sequences were invented for. Again, a big on-premise where your first sale was your only sale. And so you needed a big sales force with wearing suits and being paid on commissions, knocking on people's doors, shaking hands and talking about this. Do you buy like that anymore? Enterprise or otherwise? How do you buy today? You buy with subscription. You buy monthly, right? You pay $7.95 for something, expect it to do a job for you. And if you like it, you will buy more of it. And if not, you will switch. So recognizing the change in the business model is important, but how that translates into how you organize your functions is important.
Welcome to the Product Tea with Leah. I am your host, Leah Dara, and we are about to spill the tea with the best from tech about product, growth, and senior leadership topics. Good morning, everyone. She is a transformative business leader with a track record of pioneering customer success initiatives across giants like Microsoft, Amazon Web Services, where she significantly scaled operations. Currently, she serves as the Chief Customer Officer at Entrust, driving innovative customer experience models and strategies. With over 2 decades in the tech industry, she was busy improving cloud adoption rates, established key customer success frameworks, and led digital transformations. Beyond her corporate achievements, she's deeply involved in sustainability efforts, supports various startups, and serves on the board of the Washington Technology Industry Association. What a mouthful. She's also contributes to her local community in Medina as an elected council member, shaping civic plannings and policies. And now she's sitting in a hotel room and is having a good conversation with me in the next hour. Welcome to the Product Tea, Harini Gokul. How are you doing this morning?
It is so good to be here, Leah. I have to say, one of the best introductions I've ever got. Someone, such strong words. It's sort of nice to see your background being read back to you.
Well, this is the only reason why I go on other podcasts. So other people tell me what they think about me. And the interview is just like, it's very good for a person with anxieties. But Harini, did I forget anything? Do you want to add anything? I mean, you're more than just like your professional background, of course, but like, is there anything that we need to mention?
You said all of it right. I'll say maybe add 3 things, Leah. One is, at my heart, I'm a builder. I'm a recovering engineer. I did engineering school in India as a way to get out of having an arranged marriage. So that was one. I do a lot of work in cybersecurity these days, in digital identity and protecting customers against deepfakes and synthetic fraud. I do that work with a lot of banks and government institutions. So that to me is, I like that because it directly connects my work to our lives, right? We're helping solve problems that are very important to people. And that I enjoy. That's why I sit on council. That's why I do the work I do. Third, personal life. I have a 10-year-old and having him is my biggest joy.
That's very nice. Is he going to be a CTO, a CPO, a CRO, or like, what is he going to be in the future if you had to guess?
He wants to be the president of the United States.
Oh, okay. So he's very humble.
When I ran for council, he doorbelled with me. We knocked on 3,000 doors in my community to introduce us to people. And Alex was 5 and he knocked on every door with me and he loved having conversations. So he's a secret extrovert who pretends to be an introvert. So he's quite convinced he wants to run for some public office as he grows up. And why not be president?
Yeah, why not be president? Yeah, I mean, it sounds perfect. Okay, very happy to talk with the mom of the future American president. Please tell him that I was positive and nice to you as well, so for future favors. But we're not going to talk about him too much. So what do people get wrong about you once they get to know you?
That is a good question.
And a difficult one.
It is a difficult one because I'll sort of think about it, right? Very early on in my career, you do all of these tests. What does your outer personality look like? Your inner personality look like? And for a lot of people, there's big disconnects. They're huge extroverts outside. They're huge introverts at home. And you're like, oh my God, it's so hard to bring my extrovert self to work. I had none of that. I am exactly what you see is what you get with me. So it is hugely disappointing to people because they come to me and they say, oh my God, you're so structured and you're like organized. And I'm like, yep, that's the way I'm in life. So I bring my full self to work. The one piece that people do think is I'm very directive And, I take a lot of decisions at work, right? It is my job to make decisions and to be accountable for decisions, more importantly. And so there is a perception that do you decide everything? And I am the opposite at home. I only make the decisions I have to make, and they mostly tend to be professional. But most other things for me, I'm very happy to sort of ride along on the journey as somebody else makes a call.
That's very interesting. My dad was quite high in the military. And whenever he was at home, he did not want to have any conflict, which is interesting because he was shouting the entire day at work, so to speak. But yeah, that's what it is. Okay. So I have one thing that I did not expect about you. I think at least like when I was starting to kind of research a little bit, right? So I also looked into this and so forth. And it's interesting because it kind of serves a little bit of a stereotype. And this goes a little bit on a tangent and is leading now into the topic that we're going to talk about. So you have a technical background.
Yes.
For yourself. I would not expect that if I just like hear you speak, because it seems like you were born as a manager, like in the best way possible, right? So like strong voice, like hey, here's how this goes and so forth, right? Like understanding scale. But I think sometimes people also forget that we had other jobs in the past. I was also an engineer, a terrible one. But yeah, so what unites us is that we've both been Microsoft. We definitely, I think you are now at a much bigger scale, still like an enterprise and so forth. And one of the recent articles that I wrote about on LinkedIn started on the product side in terms of there are a couple of things wrong in the industry. And so we did a product-led success report in 2024 where we were surveying teams and we asked a couple of questions. And one of them was like, hey, how many of you are removing features that do not drive value for the customers? Right? Like, let's say you do know that you have stuff that you should actually remove. And like 65% of the teams are not doing this. And I'm coming more from the product side.
Yeah.
And we have this problem that I think one of the reasons of this is that P&L, so like profit and loss responsibility, like whether you are being held accountable as a function on revenue, is something that is not traditionally really across the company. It's very, very commonly only with sales, or you have some kind of leadership positions, but it never really, don't want to say trickle down because that's a different term now, but like it never really goes down into the organization. What is your take on having revenue responsibility as a general framework in any context, maybe also in the work that you do still today?
Yeah, it's mission critical. I'll start with that. So clearly, I have no strong feelings about it. To me, so if you take it beyond revenue, and I could go interesting ways based on your comment, but I'll stay focused on the revenue piece for a minute, Leah. So if you sort of step back from revenue, right? What I care about is that all of us in a company, all of our teams understand the outcomes we're driving towards. And revenue tends to be one of those very tangible outcomes that you can actually say, I know what that looks like and I know what I need to do to get there. And to your point, I'm not sure everybody embraces that, or they don't understand how their actions can lead to that outcome. And if you take my role of customer success, right, customer experience and success, having done this now for a very long time, before that, I helped, as you said, cloud adoption in Western Europe. All of those roles were considered tangential or supportive to revenue, but the link between what I did or what my teams did and the outcomes it produced was never clearly articulated or understood. And I think that's a huge gap. And maybe you could do this and get away with it while money was cheap, maybe 4-6 years ago in the big boom cycle we were in. And you would be okay. You would be okay stuffing 40 product features into a product with only 20 being used and the other 20, sort of being out there, and no one would think about it. Or you could get away with it in an old sort of on-premise licensing model where at Microsoft, you and I both know we sold a lot of things that stayed on the shelf, right? And kudos to Microsoft for turning that around. They did that by introducing the CX function. But my net is we should all be held accountable for understanding how our activities drive P&L, how our activities affect top line and revenue, and what we need to course correct. So I'm a big fan of having accountability. For an engineer like me, having a tangible data-driven number is very easy for me to motivate my teams to say, are we closer to it? Are we farther away from it?
Okay. That makes a lot of sense. You're not the first person to say this, of course. And I'm always trying to be very practical. And I also try to share how I am doing it. So now I'm very interested in how you do this. So one of the problems that we have is that, okay, customer success as a function. We maybe also need to define a little bit what customer success is. I always like to go a little bit into the basics because, as you said, at least where I'm coming from, customer success is first and foremost for the customer and in the company for expanding revenue, upselling, giving more or like showing more value also to the customer, knowing when to reach out and so forth. So there's an interesting kind of overlap with support to some degree and also sales. So like this kind of the acquisition part, but also helping someone.
Yeah.
And the weird thing for a lot of customers in B2B SaaS is that they do not care with whom they talk specifically inside of a company, but they would like to talk to the same person.
Yeah.
But depending on what your issue is it support? Is it like I want to increase my licenses?
Yeah.
Or is it something completely different that you need to have maybe like second level, third level support? It's always like a different person. And it's like this 90s or like around the year 2000 stereotype where you call a company and you're getting handed off to like 3 to 4 different people. I would also like to talk about this a little bit because P&L responsibility, while it is, it is nice, and I think it is a good thing, we still need to kind of understand that the customer doesn't care about our organization as much as we do. But let's maybe just start there, because what you said is we should understand how things are connected to the revenue. Now, you are someone that also operates at scale.
Yeah.
You have directors between you, maybe another middle management layer between you and the teams that are then working in the organization. So how do we specifically set this up in an example maybe where you feel like, hey, this is how it's done in a way that works for you?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, we can always tell, but showing is more powerful. So we'll do it with an example. But you said a number of things as you led up to that, Leah. And if I can react to it, because I agree with a lot of things you said, right? And I think we're not having this discussion enough, which is we are employing old models, you said, from the 90s. I honestly believe, like the way we think about the sequential, I am going to sell and then you will take care of post sales and then you will call somebody, is done, is antiquated. We need to go back to first principles of what we are trying to do in this market and how we are serving and who we are serving, right? Think about the models that these sequences were invented for. Again, a big on-premise where your first sale was your only sale. And so you needed a big sales force with wearing suits and being paid on commissions, knocking on people's doors, shaking hands and talking about this. Do you buy like that anymore? Enterprise or otherwise? How do you buy today? You buy with subscription. You buy monthly, right? You pay $7.95 for something, expect it to do a job for you. And if you like it, you will buy more of it. And if not, you will switch. So recognizing the change in the business model is important, but how that translates into how you organize your functions is important. So as an example, and I'll tell you the third piece of thinking about it, which is the cost of delivering it, the cost of sales. If your first sale is just that, your first sale, and you have recurring sales, how do you best compensate people and who do you have enrolled to do that? So as an example, and I'll take the example at Entrust here, right? I was brought in 2 years ago to be their first chief customer officer. And what that meant, and you asked for definition, so let's do that because there are not enough CCOs and each charter looks different. So I have all of a traditional post-sales organization. Once we sell to a customer, how do you help customers adopt, which is job number one in a subscription economy? Adopt and use. How do you support them as they go through that? So implementation services associated with it because we have deeply technical products. Third, customer success that helps you with ongoing usage, making sure you're getting the most value from your product. And fourth, a more reactive but intelligent technical support function. That is, to your point, connecting the dots among and across all of these functions. So when somebody calls tech support, which, by the way, calls have dropped dramatically, right? Depending on where you live, most people want to engage at their pace. So I would rather email you or chat with you versus pick up the phone and wait 45 minutes. That's the reality of the worlds we live in, right? I want to do everything I can from my mobile app, from my phone, and versus having to sit on the phone. And customers expect you to be interconnected. If I have a customer coming in through my website, by the time they come into my technical support chat, they expect that I know where they have been on my website. I understand what they are looking for, and I'm able to serve it to them more proactively when they come in. So our post-sales organizations are transforming in a huge fashion, right? All of them are becoming more proactive. They are also becoming more revenue-driven. Because revenue doesn't happen just at the start of the journey. Revenue happens everywhere. As an example, if you buy something, if you buy a product, a B2B enterprise product, let's say a big government buys it or a big enterprise buys it, a financial institution, if your implementation, how that product works with other products in your ecosystem does not go well, let's say the API integration doesn't go the way you want to, you don't get the value you want or the time to value you want, what is your choice? You can walk away at any point, right? You can decide in 6 months from now, you're switching to somebody else and moving on. So there are multiple players in the ecosystem that serve the same need. So my differentiation to my customer is how well do I serve it compared to others? Am I able to understand what you need, deliver it faster than everybody else, and make sure that I'm innovating faster than everybody else as well, right? So to that point, I think this is why every function cares about revenue. And what decisions do you make to support that revenue? So for us, and I'll go back to now more specifics, right? I carry a net revenue retention and a gross revenue retention target on behalf of my company. So I'm accountable for a number that I don't fully control. So that's the first thing. And that is how it should be. Because my job is not just to do what I do or my functions do, it's about shepherding and stewarding the rest of the company to move in the direction we need to go to make sure we are retaining the most amount of customers. And of those customers, we're growing them to the most extent possible. So 2 jobs to be done. You secure them, you grow them. And I'll stay there for a minute. It's easy to have 10 list of metrics to do. And then you wonder why people are confused and they don't know what they're going for. 2 or 3 is my magic number, right? And everyone carries that number. So for us, it's securing, which is your gross revenue retention. It's growing your net revenue retention. I would like, as our consumption businesses increase, I would like a more usage one, but we'll get to that next time we talk. The third one is something about SAT. And the one about SAT, I use NPS today, and I'm not a fan of it, and it doesn't do everything for me that I want. But the reason I do it is because I want to hear signals. So that is the third point I'll make. Anytime you pick a metric, know what it does for you. So NPS is helpful for me because it gives me signals of what my customers are thinking of. And if I'm smart, I'm going to use those signals and translate them into actions like product feature reviews, understanding roadmap, understanding investment, understanding competitive signals. So that's the second thing about metric. You have metrics everybody shares, you keep them to a list of 2 or 3, and then make sure that you translate it and connect it back to actions we do. So as an example, our customer success team carries a retention metric, the secure metric, and they map it to a customer portfolio. And for those portfolio, map it to the actions they take on the portfolio, right? They're very connected. If I need this number, it comes from this segment. This segment has 450 customers. These 450 customers are here, X, they need to go Y. Here are the 3 things I'm going to do with it. And we do it with the help of Gainsight. So I'm very grateful to Nick and his team for their partnership. But for me, it's very simple. It's sequential. And you you learn as you go. But everyone understands what we are going towards and how we are going to get there.
Okay. I want to touch on 4 things.
Yes.
And I've written them all down so I do not forget about them. There's very interesting stuff in there. So maybe the first question, let's not go overboard with it because I really want to go back to the other ones as well. But you said customer portfolios. How do you group these portfolios around? So what is the common denominator that these have? Are these grouped by revenue? Are these grouped by firmographics? Are they grouped by other metrics? How do you define these groups that you are starting to observe with your metrics?
Yeah. So segmentation is everything. Everyone's working on the segmentation, right? And I don't think there's one metric that defines it. I use a combination of 3. I want to know what I get from a customer today. So the revenue is important. Your ACV is important, your annual contract value, right? So I want to know what is your contribution to my P&L today. I also want to know what is your possibility of contribution as you go forward. So propensity to buy and propensity to grow is a second one. So, and I'll give you a very concrete example of how I think about it. I have a multi-product portfolio. Entrust has a multi-product portfolio. Every company I've worked for has had a multi-product portfolio. And I started doing this at Microsoft. So it goes back to that customer success team where we started. So if you took Azure as an example, right, which is the Microsoft Cloud product, we knew that a customer, if they could have 5 different things, if they had one product and they had X advanced workloads with us and we're doing 3 proof of concept, then they had the propensity to buy 3 more from us, right? So it's an equation. It's not art. It is science. And that is why I love what I do, because it is science and super data driven. So today I say, based on the annual contract value, based on my propensity to buy, which is a formula by itself, right? And most importantly, where the customer is going, right? If you are defense in the middle of, let's say, a major consortium finalizing a deal, I know where you're going and what your needs are, and I can work backwards from there. So market sizing, where they are, how they are growing plays a factor. These three things influence how I invest with you.
Okay, good. That makes a lot of sense. Maybe I'm coming back to this as well a little bit afterwards for more details. One of the other three things that I wanted to say as well is that more like a confirmation. The way you described now the C-level role was a very interesting one to me, because I had this question, I think, about a couple of months ago where someone asked me, like, hey, what is the difference really like between a CPO and a head of product, or like some companies it's called like a CSO and a head of customer success? Like, what is the difference between a head of, right, like, and a C-level? And very commonly, at least in the United States, and this is also, I saw myself also in what you also described a lot, is the difference that the C-levels are really responsible or the most effective when they're not just advocates for their own function, but really like, how does this fit best into the company? So that means practically that you're going to be the person that says in the budget, it's this money is better over there. It's better if we put it into sales. It's better if we put it into product. I'm sorry. And that is a fundamental difference to a head of, which I feel like acts like an advocate, like a lawyer almost, like where you're like, hey, look, we're the most important. Here's why, right? And then you have all the head ofs trying to get as much budget as is possible. And I've also been at Microsoft in the time where you stayed much, much longer, but I remember specifically like how this entire circus around getting the annual budget was just comical sometimes, like into a really, really bad way. So we had to spend money on really stupid shit, I'm sorry, just to get the budget again. I'm pretty sure you remember that probably as well. And I think I find it quite interesting sometimes that a lot of companies never really define what their roles do. They just like give people titles, but they do not really define like, what does that mean now? Other than like, oh, a C-level is over a head of, over this and so forth. So just wanted to kind of say that. So I find that a very interesting.
Can we pause on that for a minute? Because I think this is a very important point. I'm a first time C-level, right? And so it comes with its share of learnings. And one of the things I've realized is what you just said. The difference, truly, my first team is my team of my CEO's directs, my peers on this who report to the CEO, right?
Yeah.
In earlier roles, like the head of roles that you talk about, your first team is the team that reports to you.
Correct.
Right?
Yeah.
So the changing the lens to say your first team is the team that you work with on behalf of the CEO, who work for the CEO, who you work with and who work for the CEO is your first team, which then leads to the conclusion you just made, which is absolutely, I think, spot on, right? The work you do is not to advocate for a function. The work you do is to get to the outcomes that the CEO and your senior leadership team care about, which does mean you put your own self-interest away and you advocate for what is the best thing for the company. And I think particularly in the CCO role, earning that trust and building that relationship is so incredibly important with your peers, right? So because you're going to bring back like product feedback, say your baby is ugly. Why should people care about it or trust you when you say your baby is ugly? For these reasons, you should articulate that you and I share together. That's why you, CPO, need to pay attention to what I'm saying, right? And I think that is not enough well understood, that when you are in that C-level, you are not an advocate for your team. You are an advocate for the company and the outcomes you want to achieve. That's like the first thing I say to anyone when they talk about like, I want to be a CCO or what do I do? The second thing is the role is not well understood, and it does get translated into many different things. And what I love about what Entrust did and my CEO did in particular, he's a CFO CEO, which I love. He was a CFO before he became a CEO.
Mm-hmm.
So he's very data driven. And I think that really helped us with this role. Even before I knew what good looked like, he was like, here are the measures we need to accomplish. So the role it's a spectrum, right? The CCO role, it could be to me, the underutilized side is showing up and being a cultural champion and sort of shaking hands at customer advisory boards. I see that, and I think that's the most underutilized variation of this function. And I love where I am more on the other side, which is very data driven. Did you secure? Did you grow? If not, why? If yes, let's do more of it, right? And all of that requires enablers like having the right customer advisory boards, right? Having the right customer engagement, because we don't have finite capacity or finite resources. None of us do. So how do you then focus on what is most important? And I love the crispness that this job has. And a lot of it goes back to my CEO's vision.
When you describe this is a very interesting thing, because I feel like whatever is between the C and the O is kind of where your T-shaped profile should be, while having a very kind of broad understanding of the organization. So for me, I gave myself the title this year, CPGO at Godphoto. So because I really wanted to also have the growth inside my title. Because I'm firmly convinced that you cannot be a good CPO, which is anyways already a relatively new role in the industry. If you think about it, like having product at the C level was a relatively new one. And I do not think that you can drive revenue in a very efficient way if you do not have the P&L responsibility, as you said, but also like the cross-functional understanding what the other functions are doing. So for instance, I had in my growth plan about 2 to 3 years ago, unironically, I had a post-it that said like, stop sucking at sales. So I grew up in all these sales-led companies, and Microsoft is very, very sales-led as well, right? So like in all these like corporate offices and so forth, but I didn't really understand like, how does this work? Like what is the separation between AEs, SDRs, BDRs? Like how does it work together with customer success and so forth? Wasn't really interested because I was more of a product person. And I feel like the future goes for really effective C-levels into this direction, where you are quite strong in understanding this cross-functional kind of inner working together. So you can say yes, but also say no to things when they go wrong. So like a very specific example, and this goes into one of the other things that I wanted to talk about, is we said in the beginning, or you also underlined it, that this model of the customer buys, the customer retains, and then maybe the customer has maybe a problem somewhere, right? Like, so we need to give support is kind of like the entire journey. Of course, this has changed. The problem is we still have organizations that are kind of separating everything like this. So we have marketing, this function, right? The customer success, this function, and so forth. So how do we get around this? So we started by about 20 years ago, someone had an idea and said like, hey, we need cross-functional teams. What is a cross-functional team? You have a product team, for instance, where you have a product manager, a designer, a couple of engineers, and then you kind of bring this together. But it's not really fully cross-functional, right? Like specifically in B2B, someone from customer success is still missing, someone from marketing is still missing, someone from sales is still missing. So we're trying to use like these patched up solutions, like to kind of not address the elephant in the room, which is that fundamentally a cross-functional organization needs to have all kinds of skills inside of a team to drive revenue. It's a very, very difficult topic. I'm very, very passionate about it as well at scale, because I feel like it's very difficult to kind of get going. And here's one thing where I find this quite interesting. So I do think that we have found a way of working where product and engineering sort of works together, like so we can actually ship good product. But as soon as we have something from the outside, again, exactly what you said, customer calls, but customer already had a call with a support agent over there, had also an AE 6 months ago that was reaching out to them on something completely different. And now they have the customer success person on the phone. So here the problem starts with, do they now know before they pick up the phone who this is and what happened before? And this sounds like it's a relatively crystal clear problem to solve.
Yeah.
But the problem is, in my experience, two things: systems and process. The systems, sales is using HubSpot. Customer success, I don't know what right now is the cream of the crop right now. Maybe it's Gainsights, I don't know. They're using that. Support uses Zendesk over there. How do you think about this? Because I have a very clear opinion on this. What can we do to bring this information together on a simple way that is also achievable at particular scale when you come into a company where all this information is living inside of different kind of silos? How do we get started with this? Because it's quite hard to kind of change. I don't know whether you have an opinion on this, but this is something that's quite dear to my heart.
I do. You said something else earlier, but I'm going to come back to that and address the question you just asked. I agree. I think it's one of the hardest problems is data is fragmented and sitting in 5 different silos, right? Between our marketing systems that do demand gen, between our sales systems, between our customer success and our technical support systems at any given point, right? And there's probably more, right? Your NPS surveys go through a whole different vendor and a whole different thing. So the problem is real. And the problem, I don't think, has been solved by anyone. And that tells me, and it is because it is complex, right? Most people, the easy problems are the first ones to get solved. So it tells me something about the problem that so many of us have made fair attempts at it. And so many technology firms, right? Like if you think Salesforce now has a CRM system that tries to bridge sales to customer success and more. Gainsight, as an example, has a customer success system that bridges to product for exactly the point you made. How do I get feedback back to product in a timely manner that can drive action? But I don't think there is a solution out there. I'm curious what you've heard of. And I think it is because we trade off the urgent for the important. As companies, given our priorities, if you're public, you have shareholder accountabilities. If you're private, you have your board and you have your PE or VC accountabilities. And this is such a spaghetti bowl of data, distangling, entangling. It requires addressing so many legacy issues on operations, on sort of behind the scenes, back of scenes, picks and shovels type infrastructure, that this does not raise to the top of a priority list. You have urgent priorities to take care of. If you have important ones, you want to show ones that you can talk to tangible progress on. And something like this is so important for your business to function better. But I cannot put a dollar to it, right? And so it becomes very hard in this day and age to say, I'm going to spend all this time and all these people on something that I know is really good for me, but I cannot put a dollar number to it of what it will make for my top line or how it will help my bottom line. And so I think most of us stay away from it.
Yeah. You know why? Because it's a cross-functional problem, and the person's head it costs is the CEO's, because he has to make or she needs to make the decision. And cross-functional problems have this really unwieldy kind of thing to them that they feel awkward, they feel dangerous with little upside. So, for instance, there's a very particular problem right now in the industry that is an excellent example, I feel like, that illustrates this. So there's a thing called product-led sales. I'm talking a lot about it. It's essentially about how can we surface to sales product signals in the right time in a way that they can understand them to help them drive sales better.
Yeah.
When should you reach out? How should you reach out? Does this person want to talk to you? You know, like, do they hate you, Gary, or do they not? And so forth, right?
I love that. Yeah, we have it too for what product we just acquired that we're trialing. But I think product-led sales has sort of been the theme the past few years and the right way to go.
Exactly, right? So like it's a mixture between like self-served and sales, but it's not so clear like when it starts and when it doesn't start. But anyway, this is a different kind of topic for a different thing. But anyways, so it's a very clear problem. Why is this a clear problem? Because salespeople very commonly, that's also their job, are focused on acquisition, and they commonly do not know how to do data. They do not know how to read data. They do not know how to query databases. That's not their job, right? Like, it's not what they learn. The only SQL they know is sales qualified leads, but they do not know how to query a database with SQL. So they do not know how to consume data. So one of the things that happened in the industry is we had a couple of players coming up like 3 to 4 years ago that were like, hey, why do we not make an analytics tool that is specifically designed for sales to help them identify these signals? You know, and on first sight, you think like, hey, that's a brilliant idea. So we had Correlated, we had Pocus, there were a couple of other players that were coming up. All of them, except for one, went belly up in the meantime right now. They imploded. And I feel like it's a prediction that I've been making for quite some time now, and I also think that this is going to happen in the future, is you always, just like the C-level, every software is like primarily for one function, and then it serves others a little bit tangentially. You know, like for instance, you know, like Jira is mainly an engineering tool, but, you know, in some companies, you know, you can also do project planning for product managers and so forth. So the problem is, again, the more dedicated systems you have for your individual function, the harder it is to kind of connect them through APIs, you know, also, as you said, you know, like you try to kind of sense stuff around and so forth. So we need to have some kind of solution. I don't know whether it's an agent or a software, you know, everybody's talking about agents now and so forth, that kind of connects this. And I do not know in which direction this goes. However, I have this conversation quite a few times, and I think the way to do this is relatively straightforward with what we can do nowadays. When I come into companies, normally we start to talk about this, and then we start to talk about, okay, so what data do we need to show to everybody in the organization to know everything that they need to have to kind of understand the customer, right? And I'm like, okay, fair enough. So what do I need to know about Harini in order to understand who she is. Oh, well, we need to know when they contacted support, sales, and that so forth, right? And then all the functions are coming and say like, oh, but we also need to know this and this and this and this and this and this. And then you start to have these very famous Excel sheets with 400 metrics. You know them, right? Like you're smiling.
Oh my God, I've lived through it. Yes.
And the project dies.
Exactly.
That's what it is. And I have burned my fingers 2 times before I found a way for myself that actually works. And the way is you need to keep it simple. Similar also to what you said in the beginning on like, like we have 3 metrics or whatever. Yeah. Prove first that you can serve or like surface something, 1 metric or 2 metrics to all the functions that they can easily consume.
Right.
So for instance, how much money a customer makes, right? Serve this to all of them because you still need to build a system for this, whether it's an API, whether it's a dashboard that is just like, grabbing all the information like every once a day and so forth. And then you go around in the company and you ask, get me the revenue number from this particular customer. I ask the product managers, I ask maybe the engineers not, but I ask support and I ask customer success. I want them all to use the same system and I want to see how fast it goes for them to kind of bring it up. That's how you have to do it. As soon as you get lost in these Excel sheets with 200 to 300 metrics, you lost. Because it's so important to just have systems that are easy for people to access in their workday. Yeah. It really pisses me off, because sometimes they say like, oh, well, that they have an account on this particular system over there. Sales is never using it because they, like the login is failing. It's a different system. While they're bringing it up with HubSpot, it doesn't really work, or like it covers their screen, whatever. You never know. It's just, for fuck's sake, can we do some product management internally to do something simple before we blow it up into the complex things? And this is how I'm doing.
I love it. And I think you're right that so many things die on the vine because they become more complex before people understand the so what, right? So if you extend the thread of what you just said, I serve up 1 revenue number. What does it mean? And you serve up that number and you say, this is how you use it. This is the action to it, right? Because so many of us have data for data's sake. And, I'm a self-confessed data nerd, among other things, and I love my data. But what does that data do for you to drive your business? I think that's the question to ask across the company, right? And then you see the lens change. It's no longer 400 things. You need 5 pieces of data, like asking what your revenue is in order to drive the action and outcomes. And I feel like sometimes we don't have that clarity. We get so involved in the activity, we forget what we want to do with it. So I love that there are more systems for bringing clarity into this process.
I don't know whether there's anything good so far. I always return to, I don't know. Maybe sometimes it's also like just a table in Airtable, like for the smaller company specifically, like that just pulls everything. But I want everybody to have the same bookmark. I want them to consume it in the same system that they have to use daily, ideally, because what hasn't worked so far is to send a flag to Salesforce. I always have to make this kind of side because Mark Benioff definitely doesn't talk to me anymore because I'm constantly making fun about his product. Or like they send a flag to HubSpot. It's just weird. Like it doesn't really work because people do not really use it because it doesn't really help them.
Yeah.
But yeah, so in this regard, the art is really about keeping things simple. How can you keep them simple? If you know what matters, because just because you track a lot does not give you instant clarity on like, oh, this is the 1 metric that we should have looked at after all, right? But that's a different kind of point. I wanted to touch on one thing, and I'm pretty sure people who are listening to this are waiting for it as well, because every time the topic of NPS is coming up, I'm going into a rant. And I always have this conversation with customer success people.
Yeah.
You are the one function that has some kind of leg to stand on where I'm like, okay, maybe I'll give you some benefit of the doubt, but I'm ranting against NPS all the time. I wanted to hear your opinion on this because I feel like it's a very good one. So I'm not going to go and tell you now how shit the NPS is, but it is, like as a metric.
Well, you heard me say it, right? I think I made my feelings clear on the topic.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And very interesting one that I found that sometimes can work. And it's not just like instead, but sometimes as an addition is the time to value to a very specific point.
Yeah.
So let's say we have, this is again, like keeping it simple, like for customer success, it could be something around how long does it take for us to deliver a specific value? So the most straightforward one is how long does it take for a customer to try to contact us, through an outbound function, right? So like they want to call us and us handling the first request of them, right? So like, how fast can we get to the first response? What that does is it incentivizes the function to pick up the call, like to keep the number of missed calls very low, of course. It also makes sure that they answer fast in case it's an asynchronous reach out, right? So like for email and so forth, and then you can still sub-segment it afterwards. But in order to keep it simple, I really like this time to value thing. And for the product side, I really like this. And I'm not sure you want to go into this, but you also mentioned product usage metrics.
Yes.
Let's say we have a product that is about creating documents and organizing documents. We did this at small PDF. So we knew that the amount of documents that a customer creates is directly correlated with the value that they're getting out of the product and whether they're going to expand and so forth. So having these metrics that are directly causing revenue is a very, very powerful thing if you manage to make them simple. But they're not about revenue, right? So like they're about the value creation metrics. They're directly connected to these value capture metrics. And I feel like product is inherently bad at understanding this connection. And I wanted to also hear from your perspective whether this is also your experience and like how can we keep it simple in that sense? I know this is a very broad question now again.
No, it's a great question. And I do think this is an important question, right? So when I said I have a short set of metrics, there are 3 outcome metrics, what you call value creation metrics, value capture metrics. And there are a few leading indicators, the value creation or the value understanding metrics that lead up to those. And to me, one of mine is time to value. Because, and it depends on the product portfolio you have, right? If it's a point and click thing, it's a very different understanding and conceptualization versus a more, what we do, especially in cybersecurity and the portfolio that Entrust manages, is a deeply complex infrastructure set of products and services, which means that there is a lot driven based on customer ecosystem and environments, and that needs to be successful. So the work we do to get customers up and running, so to speak, and accelerate time to value is super important for us. And for me, I've always had that, and it's even more so now in my current role. So this is how we work with the product team. With the product team, we agree on what that should look like. How many customers, what is the range, whether it's X days, Y hours, figure out what the right thing is, and then we take a commitment for it and track us to a goal that links back to people's performance. And so as an example, my leader of professional services has this goal. His teams have goals for the different businesses, for the products they handle. Their teams have the same goal, and we track, measure, report, reward, recognize based on that. And I think that is still, it can be simplified. It can be made more sophisticated. Of course, this is very early in the journey, but I agree we need that in concert and in partnership with our product teams, because it's also a two-way road, right? Because the more we implement, we learn what it takes to implement and what is needed to make customers successful. And that is feedback my sales team needs to have, my product teams need to have, everybody around the company needs to know that. So I talk about things when they go wrong, especially and do postmortem, so we can actually sit and stare at it and say, what went wrong and how can we fix it? So those are the only other metrics as leading indicators that I would take. Did we want to go back to NPS? I don't know. I think we...
No, this is all good. No, this is great. So I have a very specific example that I can kind of use to illustrate or like how we can approach this in a meaningful way. So the way that we set targets in a company is always to kind of improve something, right? Like if we just could run the systems as they are, nobody's happy with that, right? Like, so the markets are also kind of running away from you at some point, and you need to kind of constantly like improve your systems a little bit to also pretend that, you have a justification in the company, of course. So we had a response time in 2020, I think, at small PDF of about 3 days with the customers. 3 days meaning first time of outreach and then average day on like until they get a response. And then we had a very specific, ambitious goal from the COO at the time. And I love COOs for this very, very reason, because they're very cross-functional, right? Like they're doing everything that the CEO doesn't want to do to get it down to 15 minutes. So we started to do that. And this was before ChatGPT. This was before chatbots were actually useful and so forth, but whatever that means. And the difficult question was also so how do we measure this in the first place, right? So there was this kind of investigation that we did. We found out it takes 3 days. And then the second question was so how can we get to this number continuously? in a fast way. Like someone like you can actually look at it in a dashboard, like, so what is the number now rolling back in the last 7 days and so forth. So that's already a challenge. And then getting it to these 15 minutes, you start to realize that, at some point, so what about people who are reaching out to us by phone versus those that are reaching out to us by email? Because email is 99% of all the requests that we had, and 1% was only the phone. But the revenue that was tied to the people on the phone was much higher in relation than the people who were reaching out by email. Sometimes how it is, right? Like the bigger accounts are contacting you by phone. That was just the reality back then. And then you start to sub-segment it. But we would not have been possible to have this implemented if we didn't start in an easy way, right? So like we had first a dashboard with like, hey, this is taking 3 days. We want to get this down to 15 minutes. And then we were like, hey, now we can make it even better. Now we can sub-segment it. So don't start with the end solution if you can get the easier one first. So I think also on this point, I'm like, because I feel like you want to go back to the NPS. I feel like my issue with the NPS in this regard is that it's not really actionable. It only tells me if something is wrong in general. I cannot do anything except for if a big client, a big account tells you you are a 1, you better grab the phone and do something about it. That I understand. But for a broader metric, I do not think it's that useful. Because it's a hypothetical question, people also offboard themselves, right? Like people who hate you, they do not give you feedback anymore. But I really like it. Like I prefer CSAT or CES, where you just ask specifically after they've done something, like whether this was easy or not.
No, I love that. And I want to say for all of this, right, back to the time to value, back to the example you gave on the CEO wanted 15 minutes to be 3 days to be 15 minutes, or NPS. The challenge we have, and that's why first principles are important here, right? We look at this from an inside to outside perspective, an internal perspective, one. Second, we do it based on our history of where we come from. What we forget here is the customer's perspective, right? Yeah. So as an example, while 3 days is terrible, if the customer and 15 minutes is great, maybe the customer is getting 5 minutes with your competitor response times, right? So compared to the 5, 15 is already lagging. So you're starting off already behind without knowing it. And so one of the things I agitate for is benchmarking us to what the customer thinks is good, in addition to looking at where we need to go, because there's an improvement journey to be done internally. But that is one of the big things we bring in is what does a good benchmark look like? And how do we make it an outside-in benchmark compared to what our customers experience? Because they have several solutions and their perspective is based on all of those solutions, not just based on us, right? So that's the first thing I'll say is external benchmarks and outside in. And the second thing I'll say is there's leading and lagging indicators, right? And, there are many different ways to think about it, but I prefer things are nice to have if they're lagging. But to your point, if they're not actionable or they don't come in a timely manner to help me drive action, it's limited usefulness. And if it's limited usefulness, do I really want to spend resources, capacity, time, and dollars on it? I don't think we can afford to anymore. So in some ways, the constraints we've seen, the economic constraints we've seen, just money getting more expensive in the past few years, has forced us to think about what are the must-haves that we need to go to. And the nice-to-haves nicely will just fall off your plate and nobody will even know they are gone. And that's how you know they should have gone 10 years ago.
I really, 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 really like this. I've written an article about something similar where I'm just saying like, hey, focus on the top 3 things that are the most important and actively avoid a priority 4, 5, 6, because those are the ones that almost made it. They always get you distracted. So you said something really beautiful. You said like, what does good look like? And I feel like this is one of the biggest mistakes that I did when I was in my first head of product role. I was very underqualified. Absolute shit show in every conceivable way. My performance was not that good. I was a good product manager, I felt like, but I was not a good manager, head of whatever, understanding how any of this works. And I think I had a good idea on how does good look like. But this is, I also feel like in some way a different word for a differentiator in the market. So what makes us more special and that people also keep us in mind towards other people. So I had a good idea on what that looked like, but then I made the really big problem or mistake that I did not know how to change the organization. Because what that also sometimes means is that our organization is in the way that it is for a specific reason. It is in the current organization has brought up the status quo that is not good enough. So we need to change it. And my mistake was that I always thought that I have to kind of make it happen in the current constraints that we have. Like I didn't want to shake up the organization too much. But I feel like with experience, at least for me as well, it felt always like always start from this differentiator and think about, so now what do I need to actually change, rather than just like trying to fit all of this into the current systems that you have. Like, oh, so this is how we do product management. Oh, so this is how we do engineering. If it doesn't help you to reach this particular goal, you need to come up with a plan to kind of change it. Even if it is cross-functional, it's going to be painful. I know you don't like the CMO. I know you don't like the CTO, but please talk to them and then try to figure out a plan on how to move this forward. Yeah. And I think that's what's so difficult. Like for me, this was extremely, anxiety driving in that I was not that experienced. So I was just like going into with this idea on like, how should I do this? And which was, oh, I'm just having this title, but now I do not really know how to do it. And I think this is one of the biggest unlocks that you can do. If you can drive something cross-functional,
right,
then you're going to advance right now.
I love that. I do think it's completely right. And some of us, the organizational constructs haven't evolved to meet the business models yet.
Yeah.
So we're selling differently. Think PLG, think consumption, right? But we're serving them or organized in the same traditional ways we've been before. And there are some limited ways to change it. But again, there could be inertia for change. There could be just self-interest at play, right? It's any number of things in a corporate environment, but it'll take a while for the organization model to catch up to where the business is. I cannot wait for it to move faster.
You know what? I think my favorite story in this regard is how HubSpot, that was a sales-led company, started to kind of this entire PLG movement. I think Brian Halligan basically just said like, hey, take a couple of people, go out of my site, create a new code base somewhere in the basement. This is a point that I just want to kind of stay on a little bit. Just ignore the rest of the organization, bring up a better solution that we have, and then we try to kind of adapt the organization around it rather than you having to work with this existing tech stack that we have. Yeah. I made the exact same mistake, or like it's not the exact same mistake, but like I made this particular mistake by not doing this when I was at Sunrise, when we were building a product-led sales process. I did not push back hard enough to say that, hey, the solution that we're creating, we need to do outside of our CMS and all this kind of stuff that we already have. It took me 4 months to code something that you and me probably could do nowadays in 2 or 3 days. Just, like from the outset, it just was not integrated into the CMS and all the approval processes and so forth. Just because someone said like, oh no, this is how we do things. Biggest regret that I have in this particular position, because everything became so slow. This goes maybe to the CEOs and the founders. Don't be afraid to kind of also like separate sometimes a team if they really do something daring so they can build it. And then if you see that it works with the customers, the budget for like integrating it into the company, you will find it somewhere.
Oh, and you reprioritize, right? That becomes one of your top 3 priorities. And I do think that's one of the hardest things. And I have so much appreciation for someone like Microsoft, right? I was there with them. You were there with them when they were still very much being outplayed by other competitors in the space. They were in a traditional model, right? Everything you just said. They were selling the old way. They were building the old way. They were building to a customer base that was consuming other things. And they were lagging where the customer was. And in the span of about 6 years, it transformed. I was part of the first CS team we set up, and I could see the change coming, the metrics we looked at. To me, that was the most telling. From the CEO on, the metrics and the outcomes we looked at shifted. And that in turn shifted behavior, which in turn shifted actions, right? So there was this very deliberate, intentional strategy, like, you mentioned the HubSpot example, and Brian said, go away and build it. And, Microsoft's at a very different scale, but similar concept of we're going to incubate this new model. We're going to measure, this is what I care about, and I'm going to talk about it every week. Then people who work for me know I care about it, and we'll talk about it every week. And slowly we make change happen.
Yeah.
And now look at Microsoft. I think it's an incredible story, and I'm so proud to have been some part of it, of how they transformed. And it could have easily gone another way.
Yeah, no, I agree 100%. I mean, I was there when they shipped Vista, which was probably the low point of any software shipment. But I mean, this is very true because also Microsoft had this kind of like this dusty image. It was always like Apple versus Microsoft, and it always felt weird. But like when you were inside, like, and that company had a lot of faults, like any enterprise, by the way, right?
Yes.
But I would say the current ecosystem that we have right now, if you think about it, it's probably more customer friendly than what Apple has nowadays. I know people will jump down my throat because everybody likes to kind of say that, oh, Apple is so great and everything. I'm like, I'm not sure, but like, hey, this Microsoft was way cooler than you think. And I was also very like, in love with technology and like really like being at the forefront of it, whatever that means.
It was a big transformation. Yeah. And I love Amazon. That was my next stint. And they were truly, people say, is Amazon truly customer centric, customer first day one? And they were all of that and more, Leah. I cannot, so while Microsoft was a transformation, Amazon was sort of built right from the ground up. And I have to say, every one of the tenets, the bias for action, putting the customer first, being frugal with your time, talk about the priority discussion we had, right? Frugality is not just dollars. It's how you spend your time and what you spend it on. And having a crisp list, you're frugal with it. So you're not being sort of fragmented over 20 things. So I have a lot, and they put the customer truly at the center of their building, right? And the systems and mechanisms to support it is incredible. I have not been at Stripe, but I hear wonderful things about Stripe and their systems and mechanisms. And that's gone on to spawn a whole ecosystem now in the Valley.
I think that's possible. I hate Stripe a little bit with passion sometimes. But more like from my perspective, I have like 7 Stripe accounts and doing the taxes is awful. But, but that's a different topic. But yeah. Okay, Harini, I think we need to come to an end. Unfortunately, this was a fantastic conversation. Thank you so much for taking the time. How do people get in contact with you? Do you want them to get in contact with you? Can only people contact you that have more than 50 million in their hands to talk to you? Like, how does this go?
I love talking to people. I learn as much as I share. So I'm always up for a conversation. What I request is that you have a sense of what you want to achieve in a conversation and sort of come prepared for that. The best way to contact is LinkedIn. It's I'm frugal. I cannot have 5 different accounts. I focus on one and I try to be as good at it as possible and as responsive as possible. But I'm looking forward to conversations, and I have office hours for startups I support and founders and others that I support. So I'm always up to spend some part of my Friday afternoon with you.
That's very cool. It will be in the show notes. And that was the end of this episode. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Leah. I'm looking forward to everything you hear from your audience.
Yeah, me too. Boom, we're done. Thank you so much for listening to The Product Tea with Leah. If you don't have enough yet, you can subscribe to my podcast right now on Apple Podcasts or Spotify, or you can head to my website, leahtarin.com, which is leahtarin.com, where you can find much more of my material or just want to work with me.